Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral, fabulous prize awarding, sometimes always adequately caffeinated weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and its crossover WWE fan base. I'm Eric Hansen, not in a pink shirt and ready to rumble in South Bend. He's Tyler James, perfectly color-coded and existing today in tropical LaPorte, Indiana. Together, we're the content creators and multimedia maestros at InsideNDSports.com. Add on tonight's show, how Irish head coach Marcus Freeman is navigating the offseason as the roster churn and coaching carousel slows. We'll give you some context of the latest moves and those still to come. Speaking of upcoming football, the Blue Gold game date is official, and we'll dive into some spring storylines. Recruiting too, including a shirtless tweet. But we're keeping our shirts on and answering your questions too. So buckle up and start filling up the queue. This is Football Never Sleeps. That's my WWE move.
Football never sleeps. You could probably come up with some good moves for that. We could put people to sleep and knock them out. Hopefully not putting them to sleep while watching us, but that would require our physicality to do that. But welcome in, everyone. We appreciate you joining us as always. Make sure that you're subscribed to us here on our YouTube channel, which costs you nothing. That allows you to get in questions during the show and lets our content populate into your feed whenever we post a video. We'd also like you to join us over at InsideNDSports.com, where you get access to our premium analysis and recruiting coverage and special access to us over on the Insider Lounge, where we share our inside information first. You can try us out over there for a 30-day free trial using promo code NDYT. There's a link to subscribe in the video description below. All right, Eric, take it away.
Okay. So we're going to start with a non-football note tonight and a somber one. One of the all-time men's basketball greats in Notre Dame history, John Shumate, passed away today at age 72. Prayers to his family and friends for their loss, and warm thoughts for the great memories on and off the court that he helped create for so many people. And now we'll move into football. Opening drive, the carousel slows. We're going to start with Chris Ash unofficially being named defensive coordinator. Then over the weekend, he was officially named. We will also talk about the GM position still moving towards a conclusion. It looks like the Bears will name an offensive line coach not named Joe Rudolph. And then the last couple of Notre Dame football players who didn't have new homes have new homes. So let's start with Chris Ash. Tyler, no surprise there. Just your initial reaction and your thoughts on the hiring.
Yeah, I think it's an intriguing one. Certainly, I think falls in the category of you can convince yourself to like it or not like it, which I think is pretty easy as it relates to coordinator hires in college football. I think a lot of us pretend we know how things are going to work out when we really have no idea how they're going to work out. But I think it makes sense in terms of probably what Marcus Freeman was looking for, and allowing Notre Dame to continue to play defense at a high level. Obviously, the standard for what Notre Dame's been doing defensively is very high right now. And Marcus Freeman, as a former defensive coordinator himself, probably knows more about what he needs to get someone to do that than we do. I know that's not exactly hard-hitting analysis or going to win me a hot take award, but I think this is something I want to hear more.
Are there hot take awards?
Oh, sure, of course.
Okay, gotcha.
I want to hear more from both Marcus Freeman and Chris Ash. I'm going to have to be very careful during his tenure to not enunciate sloppily as I do so frequently. So, but I'd like to get to know their side of how this played out, and their plan moving forward before I have more strong feelings about it. But I think it seems like there is a successful defensive coordinator in Chris Ash, and I would like to believe that Marcus Freeman should know how to get that out of him.
My initial thoughts, and we'll get into it a little bit deeper, is the one thing that I was happy about, besides the fact that Chris comes well recommended by some people that I respect in football, is the fact that when you see all these pictures of recruits with members of the coaching staff, there's not a cardboard cutout of Mike Mickens. He's actually still on the staff, and it seems like he's going to have a more prominent role. We'll get more clarity on that as we talk to Marcus Freeman on a on the record basis, and hopefully get to talk to Chris Ash here very soon. The GM situation, what's going on with that?
Yeah, as has been the case, Notre Dame is continuing to try to work things out with James Blanchard of Texas Tech. That has not fully been finalized yet, and we'll see how it plays out. I would anticipate him becoming Notre Dame's general manager, but that hasn't fully taken place yet, and we keep getting asked this question every couple of days now, because I think some reporting as it related to Blanchard and Notre Dame was premature. To me, it's not worth knowing what James Blanchard had for breakfast, or how that influences how much money he's going to get paid by Notre Dame. And so that's who is the leading candidate to get the job from Notre Dame. And all signs are pointing towards that being finalized sometime soon. But I'm not in charge of finalizing it, so I'll tell you when it happens.
Well, Tyler, I need to remind you that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. At least that's what they say. Okay, the offensive line opening on the Chicago Bears, it looks like they're going in a different direction. Joe Rudolph allegedly interviewed for that, but it looks like they're going in a different direction. So Joe Rudolph would still be with Notre Dame. And then the last couple of portal landings were two interesting ones. Pat Coogan ending up at Indiana, Rocco Spindler at Nebraska, and he wants to run the damn ball, he said there in his tweet. Any thoughts on the last two guys kind of landing?
Yeah, it seems like good fits for those guys. It makes sense that they would be landing in Big Ten territories and places that want to run the football and want to play with physicality. I think there has been an understandable attachment to both of these guys as someone who played significant as guys who played significant roles on Notre Dame's offensive line for 2 seasons in a row. But the future of Notre Dame's offensive line wasn't necessarily with them, and there's better opportunities for those guys to seek elsewhere that value them more highly and will likely lead to them starting and being assured of that sooner rather than later, as it might not have been the case at Notre Dame. So I'll be curious to see how things play out for both Spindler and Coogan and all the rest of the guys that transferred out. But I know Coogan at Indiana, Indiana had a 6th-year center who just wrapped up his career. So there's an opening at the center job there. I believe Nebraska has a couple of interior linemen who are back, and so there may be some shuffling around there. It sounds like maybe one of its returning guards ends up being at center, and then Spindler's a guard. So we'll see how it plays out for those guys, but obviously they were coveted to some extent in the transfer portal. But it's not like they're also going to Ohio State or they're going to even Michigan, which was rumored about both of those guys, or any of the teams that you would think are national championship contenders. So I think maybe calm some people down that were so upset that those guys would not be coming back to Notre Dame. But I think both those guys earned the opportunity to play where they wanted to wrap up their career and cash some checks while doing it.
My only disappointment was that in the 4 years that Rocco Spindler was at Notre Dame, his parents didn't move in next to me. They seem like they'd be really fun to live near, just based on his recruitment video. Okay, we're going to roll into some roster stuff. But before we do that, do we want to get to the question queue? And I will mention that I did mail out. Rajon did get me his address. So
all right,
Dump Davy sticker is not going to Quebec. It is going to, I think it's Massachusetts is where Rajon lives. And so it's on its way.
Well, I hope you didn't put, I think Massachusetts on the for the address.
I didn't. I just trying to remember.
No, it's okay. We
sure
don't need to give away his address either. But
yeah, it was in. I'm pretty sure Massachusetts. See, I was trying to protect his identity as if there's more than one Rajon on the East Coast. But
yeah, if anyone that watches our show meets someone named Rajon, they'll be like, "Hey, I know you." It might not even be them, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I will have to scour the prize closet for a new prize for best question at some point, because I do have a lot.
All right.
I mean, they're just cluttering up my house, but I'm sure they would be valuable to somebody else.
Yeah, I moved last summer, and I dumped a lot of old programs and stuff that I just had collecting dust. They weren't. I kept some of the ones that were from like cooler games, but like I'm sure there's a lot of Notre Dame BYU or Notre Dame Navy games from Notre Dame Stadium that are in the trash that probably didn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but it didn't need to be in my belongings anymore, because those things get heavy once you start piling them up.
Right, and they're probably not. I mean, a lot of them aren't going to exist anymore. At least the media guides don't really get published anymore, but the game programs do. Okay, do we want to do questions before we go to the next segment?
Yeah, I got a couple of defensive coordinator related questions. Jeff Stevens says, was Knowles ever seriously interested in the defensive coordinator job at Notre Dame? Knowles being Jim Knowles, who was hired at Penn State and was Ohio State's defensive coordinator last year. And why do you think he chose Penn State?
Well, they did have a really good offer. You know, the interesting thing that I found with coaching openings is that agents drive a lot of this in terms of spilling information and spilling misinformation on this. I didn't go down the agent road with this. What I know, and I know to be true, I feel like my source is really good on this one, is that he asked to be involved in the Notre Dame consideration, and that he wasn't going back to Ohio State. And so when the reports came out that Ohio State was willing to offer him all this money, I don't know if he wanted to get involved in the Notre Dame one to move up the price on Penn State. So I'm not sure about that. But I think Marcus wouldn't have considered him if this was truly just an agent move. And I don't know that he would have been the top choice either. So that's my take on it. But why did he choose Penn State? I mean, the money was really good. He has connections to the state of Pennsylvania. That's a really good job. I mean, the one thing Penn State hasn't done is beat top 5 opponents under James Franklin. But man, they've done everything else, and they have really good defensive players coming back, and they have really good offensive players coming back. I mean, there are a lot of people are picking them to be in the national championship game next year.
Yeah, and it sounded like he didn't want to be at Ohio State, so that, I mean, that's the starting point, right, as it relates to this conversation, in my opinion, and that's why he ends up reportedly, as Eric had learned, reaching out to Notre Dame, and obviously Oklahoma was a school that was also involved in trying to land Jim Knowles, but Penn State won out with a very handsome financial offer. Brian Habermill asks, on Chris Ash, I'm going to start putting the H at the end of Chris now too. Do most feel he's been hired to run Marcus Freeman's defense with the cover one and such, or do you see him taking over the safeties and running more quarters coverage?
You know, Brian, we need to have you on the show, because I have not done that deep of digging on that. He hasn't coordinated in college since Texas in 2000. And he's got a safeties background. I don't think he has to align with Marcus's philosophy. Al Golden didn't. I mean, Marcus initially said, yeah, I want somebody that really lines up with how I coach defense. And really the common factor was being aggressive, but the way they reached that end was very different. And so I think Chris Ash will have some leeway in terms of putting his own philosophy in place, but I think it's going to marry up pretty well with what Al Golden was doing. I think we're going to get to this later in the show if we have time, but I think one area I'm less concerned about the pass coverage, since Notre Dame's been the number one pass efficiency defense the last 2 years. I think the area that needs to really be addressed is rush defense. Notre Dame was 49th this year. There's no national champion that's anywhere close to that low of a ranking. Ohio State was third. I mean, but if you go all the way back through the BCS and all the playoff champions, there's no one that's close to that. So that's going to have to be something that Notre Dame looks at. But is that a schematic thing? Is that a recruiting thing? Is it a little bit of both? We'll dive into that a little bit more. Tyler, I'm handing off to you.
Yeah, there was just one thing from Brian's question that I want to that point out that was mentioned. You see him taking over the safeties and running. I don't think what position Chris Ash is coaching will dictate the coverage that Notre Dame's running. I think he would likely. It would make sense. He's had more experience with safeties for him to oversee safeties and Mickens to oversee cornerbacks. Now it could be Mickens is the defensive backs coach like he was this past year, and Ash chips in at safeties. I don't know exactly what that coaching cohesion combination is going to look like at this time, but I think
there's the freedom now with the way that things are staffed to move around, so they do have flexibility. He's not locked in
right
to taking a position.
I think what will lead Chris Ash to success is running what Notre Dame's players are best at, and I think, maybe I'm wrong, I think that's Marcus Freeman's philosophy overall. I don't know that he's committed solely to playing a 4-2-5 defense or playing a 4-3 defense or a 3-4 defense or playing mostly man coverage. Notre Dame has awesome cornerbacks, so they play a lot of man coverage. Like that should still continue to be the case. Now, maybe they mix in more quarters coverage because that's what Chris Ash has done more historically. But also, like Eric said, he hasn't been a defensive coordinator in quite some time. So maybe his philosophies will change, and maybe the talent that he has at Notre Dame's secondary differs from the talent that he had in secondaries past. So
right.
I think it's too early to predict exactly what Chris Ash is going to run, because I think it would be too early for Chris Ash to know that, because I think he needs to be familiarize himself with Notre Dame's personnel and make his decisions based off of that.
And do the opposite of what he did at Rutgers.
All right, Mike DeVoy says, in the live chat, you mentioned that with direct payments coming, NIL was going to change. Apologies if I'm misparaphrasing you. Can you describe what those changes will be?
Mike, in boiling it down to real simple concepts, each school in this house settlement that's supposed to go to the next step on April 7th. So let's say this is in place for next year. Notre Dame would have a budget to play players, a cap up to $20.5 million in the first year, and it escalates. Then NIL would then become what NIL was supposed to be. It would be a supplementary thing. It would be actual name, image, and likeness deals. Now, would people try to work around that and finagle that? Maybe, probably. But I think in general, that's the way it's going to work, because the money's going to be pretty good in terms of what power conference teams are going to be able to afford. They're going to be able to hit that $20.5 million cap. So again, you would go to traditional NIL. So a guy like Riley Leonard, if there's a car dealership or a shirt company or whatever, he would be able to get additional dollars from that. But that's at least the way it is supposed to work. Again, there's lots of legal entanglements and everything else that's going to come up, but this is the direction that we're moving.
Yeah, anyone that knows exactly how this is going to play out is pretending. They don't
needs
really know.
To be charging $9.99 a minute on a 900 line.
Terry Howie said we got some more defensive coordinator related questions. Terry Howie, and I don't recognize Terry from previous shows. So Terry, thanks for chiming in. I'm sure Freeman was feeling the pressure to hire a defensive coordinator, but you can't convince me that there aren't more talented coaches available.
Okay, we won't try to convince you. No, I mean, first of all, you need to get a talented coach, and then you need to get somebody that's available and willing to come to Notre Dame, and somebody that will fit with your culture, with your rest of your coaching staff. Not everybody would be crazy about taking a defensive coordinator job and saying, here are your assistants. You can't change out any of them. These are the guys that I have. And I'm also a defensive mind, and I'm also going to have my hand in the cookie jar too. So, and we want you to bring along this guy named Mike Mickens because we feel like he's got a tremendous future as a defensive coach. So there are some conditions that other people maybe wouldn't go. I mean, and I think Notre Dame probably has a budget. Do they want to get up into $4 million? Well, if you're going to pay the defensive quarter $4 million, do you have to pay Mike Denbrock $4 million? Do you have to pay your new GM $4 million? Do you need to give Lauren Lando a raise? Do you need to give Tyler and me a raise? They're not going to give us a raise because they don't pay us. But that's what I'm saying. So Terry, yeah, there may be people that you think are more talented than Chris, but I know that Chris is very well thought of, at least by people like Urban Meyer and Marcus Freeman. And, we'll see how it works out. I mean, I remember when Mike Elko was talking about Chris Ash, and I was talking to a mutual friend of Tyler and mine, Carter Carls, who covers Texas A&M. And I was like, I don't know about Chris Ash because that Rutgers chapter stuck in my mind. But the more research I did, the more I think this probably will work. And I do trust Marcus's eye for coaches and what will work with him. And so far, he's done a pretty good job.
Yeah, fit matters. Like you can't just take whoever you think is the smartest defensive coordinator and bring him in and expect that to work. Because they have to want to be here. For instance, Jim Knowles and being connected to Oklahoma, that didn't make a lot of sense to me because Brent Venables is a defensive coach and Brent Venables is sort of coaching for his job. So it seems like those two would be fighting for control over that defense. And if something were to go wrong, Brent Venables would obviously want to get involved with that. And so why would Jim Knowles want to have to give up that power? And so that's probably why Jim Knowles didn't end up at Oklahoma. So it's beyond just who you think is the most talented coach. So I think I understand if you don't think Chris Ash is the most talented. I also don't know that any of us have enough insight to make that statement because we just know so little about him as a defensive coordinator.
But thanks for your question, Terry.
Another who I believe is the first time I don't remember seeing Felix Sharp in the chat. Felix asked, what do you guys think about Aeneas Williams' performance in the playoff and what could it mean for his 2025 role? And Rajon Rondo lives about 10 minutes away from me.
Well, if he wants a Dump Davy sticker, he's out of luck unless the South Bend Tribune didn't throw the box away of all my stuff that I was never able to get because of the pandemic. If it's still sitting on my old desk, I can send him one too. Felix, I like your question. I wouldn't have been surprised if Jadarian Price had jumped in the portal in that little 5-day window after the national championship game, and maybe he would go somewhere after spring. But I do think Aeneas Williams has put himself in a position where he can be really valuable in that running back rotation next year. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out because and I think without Riley Leonard being on the team, there are going to be more carries for the running backs. I mean, Riley Leonard led the team in carries this year. That's going to go down no matter who the quarterback is of those three. But I think Aeneas Williams has really earned the trust of this coaching staff, and I do think we'll see him used more next year. It'll be interesting to see, once they go beyond Jeremiah Love, who gets in the game first, Aeneas Williams or Jadarian Price. And then Keaton Young's knocking on the door too.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting offseason for Aeneas Williams. I was very impressed by the way he finished the season. And it is certainly a crowded backfield with a lot of talent, but I think he made his mark, and I think will probably be the leading candidate to be the third down guy. It's hard to imagine him losing a lot of those reps, though. I think Jeremiah Love, maybe if he comes into the fullest version of himself, would probably deserve to stay out on the field in some of those situations too. But I think he earned a lot of trust from the coaching staff with what he was able to do in the playoffs.
Tyler, let me ask you this, because somebody asked me this in chat, and I'm not sure if I even got to the question. But with the tight end situation the way it is next year, do you see any way Notre Dame can utilize two backs a little bit more with not having a dominant tight end?
Yeah, I think that is something they could look into. I don't know. I mean, in my opinion, I don't know that you would take a tight end off the field. Like, I think you would still play with one tight end with two backs.
Right. But rather than two
tight ends. So, but then also that means then you have to consider your slot receiver. And I think Notre Dame slot receivers are pretty good too. So I think you have to be careful with that, but I think you can do that. And I think that's sort of what Notre Dame was looking at in last spring when they're like, well, maybe Jeremiah Love can play some receiver for us. And then we can do some things like that. And it never really panned out that way. And Jeremiah Love, obviously, his best position is in the backfield. But to get those guys in different alignments, like Aeneas Williams' big catch against Penn State, that was out of an empty set, and he motioned out into a wide receiver position. So I think there are ways that Notre Dame can try to figure out how to get those guys on the field at the same time, and I'd be interested to see how Mike Denbrock goes about trying to implement that this coming season. All right. We got a bunch of questions now. Cash Consideration says, what is Ash's history as a recruiter?
I talked to Tom Lemming about him. Tom has been doing the recruiting thing for over 4 decades. He's actually older than me. And he had nothing but good things to say about Chris Ash as a recruiter. Now, he said at Rutgers, it was awful. But he said everywhere else he's been, Ohio State, Texas, Wisconsin, that he's been a top shelf recruiter. What is he similar? I mean, he's not, he's a better closer than he is an opener. But I think as a defensive coordinator, it's very similar to what you saw with Al Golden, maybe a little bit more aggressive in terms of how many prospects he goes and sees. And Notre Dame has guys that are like that on the front lines, like Mickens and Max Bola and so forth. I think the jury's still out on Al Washington, but he does get out to see players, how effective he is. But I think Chris Ash is going to be a really good closer with recruits and have good vision on what his defense is going to be. So I would be excited about the recruiting part of that.
Yeah, and earlier in his career, he was a recruiting coordinator at Iowa State and San Diego State. So obviously knows the importance of that and a lot of the work that goes into that. Certainly those times where he was at, that was 2006, 2009. That's when I was in high school and college. So that was a long time ago, and a lot has changed in college football since then. But I think Notre Dame has a pretty good recruiting staff. I think the importance of the off the field recruiting staffers has continued to be elevated as it was with Chad Bowden and whoever the next GM becomes, if it's James Blanchard, that will also help take some of this weight off of the coaching staff, which it has, but the coaching staff has to do a good job of building relationships and selling to kids why playing at Notre Dame is best for their career and not just the best way to cash a check next year or something like that. So I think to be frank, Al Golden as a recruiter, I don't know that he was knocking down a lot of doors for Notre Dame as a recruiter, and things worked out perfectly fine for Notre Dame's defense and defensive recruiting. It helps that Marcus Freeman is the head coach. He's going to be able to help with defensive recruiting and selling that vision as well. So I think it's a very low pressure job as it relates to being a recruiter when you're talking about this current position that Chris Ash has been hired to. All right, Michael McFadden. Tyler, I can't believe Coogan goes to a team we beat in the playoffs and Spindler to a know-nothing Nebraska team. If it is really all about NIL money, how come Notre Dame didn't offer the same? Notre Dame's not offering the same in terms of playing time, let alone money. Those guys are probably almost assuredly going to start at their new places where that wasn't necessarily the case at Notre Dame. Notre Dame is Notre Dame wasn't going to go into next season paying for past performance for Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan. These guys we're going to have to compete for starting spots again next season because Notre Dame has a lot of talent on the offensive line, more tackles than it needs. That'll be moving inside, and Ashton
Craig coming back,
and Ashton Craig coming back, and if he's on schedule, could potentially be ready for the beginning of the season. So certainly it would be nice to have a player like Pat Coogan, but to have a player like Pat Coogan for 2 seasons is unlikely. To get them for 1 season was a little bit unlikely too. That Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler were willing to stick around and lose the starting jobs and be able to play the role that they did should be commended. But they have to try to maximize their career. They have 1 season left of college football, and if there's a chance they don't feel like they're going to win the starting job coming out of camp because they already lost it the year before, like, I don't blame them one bit, and I don't blame Notre Dame for being like, you know what, we feel like we can do better than what we got out of you guys this season. We thank you for what you've done, but we have to continue to improve. We want to win a national championship, not just get there. And so that's the business, and it is a business. So I think those are all things that went into the way things played out for Notre Dame and those guys who departed.
Rock on.
All right. Titus says, what about Mickens? Is he co-defensive coordinator?
They have not announced anything like that. That's what we believe. He's going to be co-defensive coordinator or assistant head coach / defense or passing game coordinator. It's going to be some kind of title bump, salary bump, responsibility bump. But that co-defensive coordinator in different places and in different teams and different coaching staffs means something different. Sometimes there are 2 guys that have fairly similar responsibility levels, and then sometimes there's a coordinator and you're kind of the assistant coordinator, either ceremonially or functionally. So there's a really wide range of what that could do. My sense is that, again, Mickens is going to have more responsibility. He's going to want to be learning, and he's earned that. But I think Chris Ash is the defensive coordinator. He's not co-defensive coordinator. Interestingly, when Chris was at Ohio State, he was the co-defensive coordinator there. So there you have it.
All right. I should have followed the Mike DeVoy question up with the Coogan Spindler conversation. Who do you think plays center in spring camp with Craig sideline until fall? Will they audition several players?
I think they'll look at some different people. I was trying to think about it because they're going to want to take a look at Garby Lambert at tackle. Will Black's not going to be there in the spring yet. The other 2 young tackles, and they'll rotate all those guys through and take a look and see if there's somebody that can help them. Owen Strebig and Matty Augustine are the other 2 tackles. My guess is that Anthony Knapp gets some center snaps, that they will take a look at him there in case there's a setback with Ashton Craig, or, just to get him some extra snaps inside and get a good look at him inside, as I believe Charles Jagaza and Emil Wagner will end up being the tackles. I think that's probably the most logical thing. Ott is a guy that's in the center, being groomed for center. Adi, yeah. Then there's
I know
Heron is
Odding.
Right, gotcha.
Oh, okay.
And then Heron is the young kid. I don't think Heron here in the spring, Tyler?
Yes.
Okay, so Heron will be here and they'll start grooming him. But in terms of a realistic option, Pendleton was kind of the guy that had really surfaced as the number 2 option there. And so I do think Knapp is the guy that will get those snaps, and maybe somebody else.
Yeah, and Joe Otting has done that at Notre Dame, and Heron. That was part of the reason Notre Dame decided to take him on in this recruiting class, was because they felt that was indeed a need long term for the program, and that they wanted to add a guy who could potentially play center. All right, Brendan McCarthy says, any worries about the Tenuta Brown debacle sharing duties?
I mean, Brendan, you can come up with all kinds of scenarios that didn't work and did work at other places. At here, no, I don't have any concerns about that because Charlie Weiss isn't the coach, and I'm not docking Charlie, but Charlie couldn't fix the defense. He could fix anything on offense, but he couldn't fix the defense. His fix was, I'm going to call Belichick and get his opinion. So no, and the Tenuta Brown thing, I don't think was a debacle so much because of sharing duties. I think it was because John Tenuta lost 20 miles off of his fastball. College football continued to evolve, and John Tenuta didn't evolve with it. He didn't get any better when he left Notre Dame. He was a stud when he was at Georgia Tech. And Brian Van Gorder was a Broyles Award winner at some point. But you have to evolve with the game. If you're just, this is the way I do things and I'm going to do it forever, then the game's going to pass you by. And I think that was the biggest problem with Tenuta and Corwin Brown.
All right. That's prior to my time covering Notre Dame, so I won't add anything there. Brennan also asks, is the secondary officially better than 2020 or 2001? Walton, Duff, Sapp, and Earl.
This 2025, not 2024. You're asking 2025. So Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, Adon Schuler, and then whoever appears, Stroman or one of the younger guys. I'll tell you what, if Ben Morrison were healthy the whole season and it was Morrison and Leonard Moore, I definitely say 2024. And I would probably even say it with Christian Gray. With 2025, yes. Yeah, all right. 2025 I'll take.
I'll defer to you as well, as that being before my time being locked into Notre Dame football.
But that was a really good defensive backfield. Thanks for making my head hurt.
I held those ones. I didn't want to he asked those earlier in the show. I didn't want to make your brain hurt too much too early, so I had to get through the halftime period yet. Okay, we got a couple more questions here before we can get back to some other things. Jack Quinn asks, do you have a sense of how Notre Dame will allocate the NIL money among the sports? And won't donors just give additional money but beyond the $21 million cap?
Well, this is so confusing for fans to understand because the cap money is what they're allowed to give. And then there's a lot of these NIL collectives are going bye-bye. They're not going to even exist anymore, but there will be kind of pure NIL. But again, Jack, if I knew how smoothly this was going to work, I should be paid more than I am. I should be doing a different job. I should be a capologist. But yes, can alumni donate? Yes. But it's not going to go into the direct payments from the university. It would go into maybe some kind of NIL venture. For example, we have heard that John Bon Jovi is interested in helping out Notre Dame football somehow. And there's some other alums, famous alums at other schools that have pledged to do so. We're going to have to see in the new framework how all that works. But yeah, they will be able to contribute. But in terms of what ND is paying, that's what the cap is.
Yeah, it's become like they're not the same things. I think it's become confusing because NIL money is not the revenue sharing that these schools are going to start doing. Those are different things, but those are different ways that these players are making money and will make money. And so it's not exactly the same thing we're talking about there.
Right. And it's not a silly question, Jack. I mean, it's a really good question that requires a good answer that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, and we don't have all the answers to. Like, do we know that Notre Dame's going to go
If
to
we
100?
do, we will change the name of the show to "We Have All the Answers."
Like Notre Dame, or if 105 scholarships is the limit, will Notre Dame go to 105 right away? We don't know that for certain. I think the anticipation would be Notre Dame will be close to it, but part of the unknown there is like, okay, does that what are the Title IX implications? There's been lots of different changes with how that is going to matter or not matter, and so there's just so many. Like, it's a very complicated puzzle that has not the parameters of like you're trying to put together a puzzle that has no edges to it. Like when I start a puzzle, I start on the edges and go in. There's just no edges to this puzzle yet, and so there's so much that you have to sort of learn and figure out as they're going. All right, Brian Emerald said, "How bad is Knapp's injury?"
It wasn't that bad. I talked to him in Atlanta on Media Day, which was a couple days before the game. It was bad enough that he couldn't play in that game. It wasn't bad enough that he would have missed if Notre Dame had a 17th, 18th, 19th game, that he wouldn't necessarily miss those. He initially thought he was going to be able to play, and then it was a high ankle sprain and just wasn't going to. So I don't see this lingering. I think we'll see him out on the field in the spring.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how Notre Dame's spring schedule works out, because it's very condensed and very close to when the season ended. So guys like Knapp, regardless if they're coming back from an injury, if they played the full season, maybe they're given some more time to recover and ease into things.
The winter workouts for guys that played a lot just started today.
Right. So yeah, I mean, they already adjusted that, so I could see it still being adjusted as it relates to spring practice. And so maybe that gives other guys opportunities. In position Snap would be playing, but he should be healthy enough to be ready to go. Even if he were to get the tightrope surgery that sometimes happens for people with ankle injuries like that, there would still be plenty of time for him to recover and be ready to go. All right, Eric, those are the questions we have, unless you want to talk about blaming who smelled in the locker room after the national championship game.
Those guys are all bigger than me. I'm not saying anything. I don't want to get in trouble and get stuffed into a locker. So the spring roster is out. Tosh Baker is not on it. He will not exercise a 6th-year COVID exemption. Surprised there or not, Tyler?
Not terribly surprising. I mean, it does seem like if he really wanted to, he could go somewhere else. Like, it didn't make a lot of sense for him necessarily to come back to Notre Dame, but if he wanted to give it a run somewhere else to keep his career alive. But as someone who hasn't been able to sustain being a starter in college football going into his 6th year, it makes sense for him to move on if he feels confident in what he wants to do away from the playing field.
Okay. Transfers Malachi Fields, who's the wide receiver from Virginia, and Ty Washington, a tight end from Arkansas, are not on the spring roster and will be June enrollees. So this is very similar to Bo Collins and Rod Hurd II. They had to finish up at their old schools and were not able to participate in the spring. Your thoughts on those two not being around for spring practice, or at least participants?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how much they're able to get around the team like Collins and Hurd did last spring. I don't know the answers to that. I think that had to help both Collins and Hurd. I think of those two, you'd certainly want Fields to hit the ground running. It would be nice to have Washington in as a healthy body because they are low on tight end numbers. But I think as experienced college ball players, I think it's maybe a little overplayed how much you need to be in for spring. I think it probably helps and gets you more comfortable in a new environment and stuff like that. But I don't know that it should impact their ability to play and impact Notre Dame come the fall.
I think the one person benefits from that in the wide receiver room is Micah Gilbert. He's going to get lots of first team reps, I think, at that boundary receiver.
Sure.
And then tight end, they're going to be Flanagan free. James Flanagan won't be here yet. Cooper Flanagan still recovering. So Eli Reardon is going to get a lot of reps, and Larson and some of those guys. And Kevin Bauman, who is on the roster. Initially he wasn't, so I thought, okay, we'll write that he's not on the roster. And then he reappeared there. So I'm curious what he has left in the tank physically. We know what he brings from a toughness and resilience standpoint. What's your expectation of Kevin Bauman as a sixth-year player?
Yeah, I mean, I think he offers leadership. I'm not exactly sure, like, if it came to, like, how much confidence they have in playing him. Otherwise, we maybe would have seen him at this point. Now maybe a second year out from any ACL surgeries, maybe he gets in a better place physically because of that. And like you said, they needed bodies for the spring at tight end. So who knows if he's here for the spring, that doesn't necessarily mean he's here for the fall, right? So they would give him an opportunity to prove what he could do for Notre Dame if he's healthy and able to do some things in practice. But I don't want to necessarily overplay that. I think kudos to him for continuing to extend his career and battle back from all the injuries that he sustained, and sort of devote himself to this Notre Dame football program.
At least one member of his family is going to be on the field in the opener, and that's his little brother from Miami. Yeah. So maybe he shows up for that and has a family reunion. So an interesting one that was on the roster is Jason Onye. Jason didn't play or practice with Notre Dame after the Louisville game in September, at the end of September. If that's a sustainable return, if he comes back and he's the Jason Onye and picks up where he did at the end of September, that could be huge. A potential starter, I think, at best, strong rotational player at the least. What are your expectations if Jason Onye can pick up where he left off?
Yeah, well, first, my expectations, like, I have to see him. We need to know that he's practicing to have any real expectations for him. He's been dealing with personal issues, and if he is able to return, that would be great for Notre Dame. I think if he isn't able to return, I think him just sort of dropping off the roster quietly would have been a sort of a strange way for that to be handled too. So it's not necessarily terribly surprising that he's on it right now. So I think I like the way he was trending for Notre Dame and his potential, the body size that he has, the quickness that he has, the strength that he has. And that is, I mean, one of the biggest question marks going into next season is defensive tackle for Notre Dame, which is why it was addressed with some help through the transfer portal. But I think, I mean, if Jason Onye reaches his potential, like, I think you could argue that would be a bigger addition than any of their defensive tackle additions in the transfer portal, right? Or am I
would agree. Okay. I would agree. Yeah. I mean, I think there's high hopes for Dawson. Elijah Hughes is interesting because he's a younger guy, and you're like, what if he's completely healthy and but Dawson's kind of proven with Louisville, and sometimes with defensive tackles, their numbers don't show their true value. I know a lot of people think very highly of him in football, so I'm curious, but I think Jason would be really, really interesting if he plays to his potential and he's back all the way. So we'll see how that plays out. Drake Bowen is giving up baseball and being football first full time. I think that's a good move for his football development. It was a tough double because it wasn't just he was doing some stuff with the baseball team here and there. He was also doing summer baseball too. And now he will be football full time. And I'll tell you what, boy, at the end of the season, he was really a good growth curve.
Yeah, he's one of Notre Dame's most important defensive players now. And I think it makes sense for him to fully focus on football and a potential pro football career, right? I mean, that's very realistic now.
Men's lacrosse team opens February 12th versus Cleveland State. Tyler Buckner and walk-on wide receiver Matt Jeffrey. They practiced soon after the national championship game and participated in an exhibition lacrosse game. Jordan Faison did not. He needed more rest, but he is expected back. I'm actually going to men's lacrosse media day on Thursday. What's your thought about Jordan Faison continuing to be a lacrosse player and trying to be one of Notre Dame's better receivers?
Yeah, I think
he is a star on that lacrosse team. It's not like he's a bad player.
Yeah, and he was recruited by the lacrosse team. Like he's probably not at Notre Dame if not for the lacrosse team. So I think like even though Notre Dame football is Notre Dame football, like Jordan Faison gets to do what he wants to do if he wants to continue to play lacrosse, because that's why he's here. The question to me is like, does that impact his ability long term as a receiver? Could he become a better wide receiver in the next 2 years if he was not playing lacrosse? The answer is probably yes, but how big of a gap is that? I don't know that it's a giant gap. I mean, he's not getting taller, right? Like that's one of his few limitations as a receiver, and there's nothing he can do about that. I think the biggest concern would be just, can he stay healthy? Like that's a lot of high strain that he's putting on his ligaments and his body, because he's quick, he's changing directions, he's playing physically in both sports. It's not like he's shooting free throws or pitching. Like obviously baseball can be taxing on like your elbow if you're a pitcher, but it's not the same, at least in my opinion. Lacrosse is going to be more taxing on your body than baseball is. But yeah, he's a
high-stressed games. I mean, they're number one in the country again, and they play a killer schedule.
Yeah, so I mean, I think he's a great lacrosse player, so he's going to continue to do that. But you just hope that it doesn't impede on his football career, and it hasn't yet. And hopefully he can go through another football season next year fully healthy, which he didn't get an opportunity to do this year because of some ankle injuries. And I'm not saying that that's related to his lacrosse career at all. But that's the one concern I would have.
I made way too long of a show outline. So do you want to go to questions or do you want to go to recruiting? We may have to skip down a few sections.
I have
recruiting.
No, that's okay. Oh, and I mean, we cover recruiting over on the website, so people can keep up with that. Michael McFadden asked or says the Notre Dame quarterbacks are going to battle in spring and summer and fall, but how can not have Steve Angeli win the job with 3 years experience and current ledger? Why give Carr a blanket 4 years?
I'll let you answer that first because I'm not sure that I understand it completely. So I'll copy off of your paper.
Yeah. Well, to start, I don't think Carr is getting a blanket anything.
Okay.
And the reason that Carr would be given the job over Steve Angeli would be because Notre Dame believes he's the better starting quarterback. Now, Notre Dame hasn't done that yet. We think that's what will eventually happen. I think I speak for Eric. I think we agree on this, that we both believe that will be what happens eventually. But, I mean, it's not like Steve Angeli is being prevented from winning the job. He's being given opportunities. Now, maybe Steve Angeli becomes a starting quarterback. That has not been ruled out, even though we believe it's not necessarily going to happen. So I don't necessarily, and like the length of CJ Carr's career potentially, like I don't think that's part of the equation either. Obviously, like if Notre Dame was really that concerned about the lengths of careers of quarterbacks, it wouldn't have continuously gone to the transfer portal for quarterbacks. But it did that in part because it didn't feel like it had the talented enough quarterbacks to beat out the guys that they were bringing in from the portal. So to me, that says what Notre Dame believes the ceiling is for Steve Angeli. Now, obviously, he's still a young player in his career and can outgrow that. And the next 2 years of Steve Angeli can be better than the versions of the past 2 years. But I don't know.
Okay, the reason
The reason the reason that Carr would win the job is because they believe he's the better quarterback. That's
right. They're gonna play this out on the practice field, and they're gonna see what they see. And what I'll say about Angeli is I think he's done a really good job of taking advantage of that experience and using that experience. And we've seen him get better and better. I also think the little sample size I've seen of CJ Carr. I mean, I've seen a lot of quarterbacks in 40 some years, and I have not been that too excited about I'm way more excited about CJ Carr as a freshman than I was Jimmy Clausen. So I don't know. The other thing that's kind of interesting here is Kenny Minchey. We have a great thread going on the Insider Lounge about Kenny Minchey, and probably the absolute best post I've ever seen on any message board ever. Somebody asked me about Kenny Minchey, why he isn't, and I just a short version of it. I said, well, you're watching him and it's like, wow. And then it's like, and then it's like, ugh. And then it's like, wow. And then it's meh. And one guy commented that that's what his wife says about him in a certain area. So I thought that was pretty clever.
And they're just definitely talking about his cooking.
Yeah, definitely talking about his cooking. But Kenny Minchey's in this too. I think it's fair to say that Blake Ebert is not, but we'll see. And Joe Otting certainly isn't, whether I say his name correctly or not.
All right, I think those are the questions in the chat in the queue, Eric. So if you got more topics you want to hit, we can do that.
Okay. Well, Notre Dame announced the Blue Gold game for April 12th at 2 p.m. on Peacock. That confirms a compressed timeline. We don't have the official start date. My sense is, they wanted to start that first week in March. Then they have spring break. They'd break, and then they'd restart around March 17th. They may have to start that week of March 17th instead of getting a couple practices in before. We'll find out. But even then, boy, you're packing a lot of practices in a very small time frame. Why are they doing this? Easter has a really weird date. It's April 20th this year. That would be the ideal time that you normally have the Blue Gold game a week ahead of the NFL draft, but they're not going to be able to do that. A couple things I wanted to get to before we hit recruiting. You did Garby Lambert and Tay Johnson features, two of, I think, the most intriguing guys in the spring that aren't starters. What did you get out of those two interviews with those two guys?
Yeah, so I spoke to both of them during media day ahead of the national championship game, and I'd save that for after things got wrapped up. Both of them sort of walked me through their freshman years, the challenges they faced, the lessons they learned, and the outlook that they have moving forward. Different stories for each guy, right? Garby Lambert comes in the summer last year, and he sees a fellow freshman become the starting left tackle, and that's kind of interesting. As Garby Lambert was the highly touted guy when Anthony Knapp wasn't necessarily, but Knapp had been around and worked his way and proved his ability this season. Lambert's the more prototypical offensive tackle. He has great size, and so I think we're all interested to see if he can push to be a starter as a sophomore. He talked about the way he had to adjust to the physicality of the game and the knowledge of the game, the football IQ. He said he needed to improve. And so that I thought that was interesting. And then Tay Johnson comes to Notre Dame, thinks he's having a pretty good camp, then breaks a bone in his foot that sidelines him. Then once he comes back later in the fall, he is asked to play cornerback, which he had played some in high school, but mostly safety. So that was a learning curve there. And he ends up learning from another fellow freshman, Leonard Moore, being his backup. And he had some neat things to say about Leonard Moore and sort of his upbringing through Fort Wayne and his outlook moving forward. To me, he wasn't necessarily sure if he's a cornerback or a safety long term. That wasn't something that he knew for certain, but he was going to be able to and be willing to play where he's needed and wherever it can get him onto the field fastest.
In relation to spring, I'm going to get back to Michael's. I think it was Michael Madden's question about Angeli. I got this a lot in chat last week. How soon does Notre Dame, is it important for them to name a quarterback by the end of spring practice? What say you, Tyler?
I don't think it's important for Notre Dame to do that. And I think the more competition is drawn out, the better in terms of keeping your roster at quarterback depth chart intact. I think a lot of times, whether or not the starter is named, the players have a good sense of how things are being handled and who's performing the best. And so that it might not matter what Notre Dame says officially about who's the starter is or isn't, to influence whether or not some of these guys stick around or not. I don't think Notre Dame needs to make a decision before like fall camp necessarily. I think they should certainly have someone in mind entering fall camp and maybe be ready to make that decision soon, because it is going to be a first-time full starter. So I just think the spring's important that everyone gets an opportunity and give them a reason to stay and give them an opportunity to win the job. I think I don't like it. To me, if CJ Carr ends up being the guy, he doesn't have to be the guy in March or in April. He could still be the guy come August, and that I don't know that would impede his ability to play his best on August 31st.
There are times where there are transformative summers for quarterbacks. Two that I can remember were Tommy Rees coming out of his first spring in 2010. Brian Kelly was convinced Rees was never going to play for them. He comes back from the summer and he's like, whoa, what happened? And Deshaun Kaiser in 2015 had an amazing summer and was really ready to push Malik, whether there was an injury or not, which seemed very far-fetched when you watched him in the spring before.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, recruiting. Notre Dame got a big commitment from Tyler Merrill. Then he took a picture with his shirt off with the coaches. He was playing a pickup basketball game. He even answered a tweet about it. How come this kid doesn't have a shirt on? I was playing pickup basketball. So what do we know besides about the shirtless Tyler Merrill?
Big kid, 6'5", 305, from Pennsylvania. He's the number 3 interior offensive lineman and number 76 overall, according to Rivals in the 2026 class. Notre Dame beat out Penn State, Alabama, Clemson, and Wisconsin. And like you mentioned, Marcus Freeman, Joe Rudolph, and Mike Mickens visited him last week and saw him play some pickup basketball. So he was shirtless in that photo. I made sure to use that today when touting his new ranking in the Rivals 250.
And Rivals has a new 250, so check that out. I think they're going to have a new 2027 250 tomorrow, maybe?
That's correct.
Am I right? Okay. And anything from the coaching visits around the country that you think is significant that everybody will want to know?
I mean, it's a lot of names and places. It's hard to boil down into small things, but I mean, Notre Dame was in Chicago. Al Washington checked out Mount Carmel High School, which is where Braden Jones, the 2026 defensive end, is at. He's committed to USC currently, but Notre Dame likes him a lot. Caleb Tucker is a 2028 defensive tackle, so he was just a freshman this past season. He's listed at 6'5", 355, and his nickname is the Bone Crusher. So I think he's going to be a name to know moving forward, and we'll see if Notre Dame is a school that he likes. But yeah, Notre Dame was spending a lot of time in Texas. There's a lot of guys that are seriously considering the Irish coming out of Texas. Mike Denbrock offered some new tight ends. So a lot occurred, and you can catch up with all that information on the Insider Lounge.
I talked to Tom Lemming about the Bone Crusher today, among other things. Some miscellaneous stuff. The Senior Bowl was over the weekend. 3 Irish players were on the winning American team. Riley Leonard was 6 of 7 for 54 yards. Kaiser 5 tackles. Oben 3 tackles with a shared sack. The combine is coming up in late February, early March in Indianapolis. Tyler, do we want more questions? Do we want to say goodbye? Do we want to tell people we're going to be on Tuesday night next week? Where do we want to go from here? I need your direction, your GPS.
All right, Mike DeVoy asked quickly, will Jabron Payne be able to participate in spring practice? I'm not certain of that. I don't think he offered me a timeline when I asked him about it before the national championship game, so I don't have a great answer there for you, Mike.
He's going to be about 11 months removed from the ACL tear.
All right. Yeah, like Eric mentioned, Football Never Sleeps will probably be on Tuesday next week. Eric has an interview in the works on Monday night that will not allow him to be here live with us on YouTube. So we'll hold to likely Monday or Tuesday unless things change. So plan on being here Tuesday night. We'll keep you posted. And obviously, if you're subscribed here to us on the YouTube channel, you'll get notified when the show gets scheduled and then alerted when we get live if you turn on your alerts. And then one more plug for subscriptions over at InsideNDSports.com. Use promo code NDYT for a 30-day free trial to InsideNDSports.com for premium analysis and recruiting coverage and access to all of our inside information on the Insider Lounge.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you.
All right, have a good week. No prizes this week.